The final few weeks of the regular season aren't usually that enjoyable for anyone. Playoff teams are resting, lottery teams are tanking, and only a couple teams seem to be jockeying around for position. Well, the play-in tournament changes that pretty much overnight. And today I wanted to talk about why I personally think the play-in tournament is here to stay. Oh, and by the way, if you're new to the channel and enjoy the content, consider subscribing. You guys probably know the gist of the play-in tournament by now, so the play-in tournament is a set of 3 games in each conference, which include the 7 through 10 seeds. The 7 seed plays at home versus the 8 seed, the winner becomes the 7 seed, the 9 seed plays at home versus the 10 seed, and the winner plays the loser of the 7-8 matchup for that final 8 seed. This structure was agreed upon by the NBA's competition committee before the season as proposed by the NBA. The competition committee includes players, coaches, referees, board of governors, you name it, pretty much everyone involved in the league's decision-making. And the passing of the play-in tournament was agreed upon as a 1-year rental of sorts, where it will be evaluated by the league, and depending on the total pros and cons they discover, it may or may not return in following years. But the theory of the play-in works really, really well, I think. As I said before, in a typical season, you might have a couple teams jockeying for a position during game 82, but that's about it. The end of the season is generally drawn out, boring, has little competitive value, and is usually the least viewed stretch of the entire season. But the introduction of the play-in tournament instantly adds 4 new teams to the competitive mix who promise to bring that competitive edge down the stretch of a long season in hopes of making that final play-in spot. So far, this has increased the competitiveness of teams seeded even lower, let's say 11 and 12. All of a sudden, teams who would typically be tanking in the final weeks of the season now have a serious incentive to compete for an outside shot at that playoff berth. I'm using air quotations here because you're obviously not in the playoffs or qualifying for the playoffs until you're in that first best of 7 series. But if you're a young team, up-and-coming team, or a team that's gone years and years and years without a playoff appearance, that 10 seed suddenly becomes incredibly attractive. By adding the 9 through 11 seeds at the very least to the competitive landscape, it creates at least 6 extra teams who will offer competitive value down the stretch of a long season. In general, teams play just over 3 games per week on a usual schedule, so these 6 extra competitive teams offer a potential 18 extra games per week with competitive value and drama. Another interesting ploy for the play-in is how it can change a team's mindset at the trade deadline. Think of the Chicago Bulls from just this season. Is there any real chance the 10-seed Bulls at 19 and 24 make such a reckless trade for Nikola Vucevic at the deadline without the play-in tournament? It's certainly possible, but much less likely. I think we could see more of these borderline playoff teams make these sorts of all-or-nothing trades at future deadlines as well. So not only has the play-in affected competitive incentive on the lower half of the standings, but it's also actively creating panic on the upper half of the standings. All of a sudden, the 5 or 6 seed can't coast through the final weeks of the season because of the risk that comes with dropping to the 7 seed, because from there, your season could be over if you lose 2 home games in a row. So we can assume this 7 seed panic incentivizes the 5 and 6 seeds to compete down the stretch as well. Now all of a sudden we've got almost half the league actively trying to win games as the season winds down. Loosely the 5 through 11 seeds, we'll say, in each conference. This, by the way, doesn't even account for the teams at the top potentially competing for the 1 seed either, much like Utah and Phoenix right now. This isn't to say the play-in will always bring about this much drama, though. The increased competition from 5 to 11 may be over-amplified this season due to it only being 72 games. Mark Stein noted that with 3 days remaining in the regular season, only 2 things were in pen for the playoffs. Boston was the 7th seed in the East, and San Antonio was the 10th seed in the West. The other 18 playoff and play-in seeds were still completely up in the air with 2 games remaining in the schedule. That is pretty unheard of in any season ever. I've certainly enjoyed the theatrics of the late game this season, but a shortened 72-game season naturally means teams have less time to separate themselves from the pack. As we dig deeper down this rabbit hole, the obvious rebuttal to the play-in is how badly it disadvantages the 7 and 8 seeds. After all, their season is lost if they happen to go cold for the next 2 games following the end of the regular season. I think this argument is more situational at best and only really applies to the 7 seed in the Western Conference. Take the Dallas Mavericks from last year, for example. They were 43 and 32, which is on pace for 47 and 35 in a full 82-game season. They finished about 8 full games above Portland, Memphis, and San Antonio, who was the grouping for that impromptu play-in tournament for the 8 seed last season. This is a situation where I think the 7 seed is clearly being unfairly disadvantaged in a play-in format. They shouldn't have to prove they're better than 3 other teams when they're 8 games above them. But still, this is a somewhat rare and isolated situation in which it's just one of the 8 teams forced to compete in the play-in tournament. Also, keep in mind the 7 seed would have 2 matchups they're favored in on top of them both being at home, so the threat of elimination is still present but definitely toned down in an already isolated scenario. The Eastern Conference is a completely different story though. Having a play-in would actually have made the East significantly more interesting the past couple decades. In just the last 10 years, the Eastern Conference 8 seed has only been above 500 3 times in 10 years. So either way, the East isn't consistently getting a quality team in the playoffs. This is why I think it not only makes sense to have a play-in, but it's also probably long overdue, at least in the Eastern Conference. Oh, and by the way, the most common record for the 7 seed in the East the past decade has been about 42-40. So again, the play-in is almost never disadvantaging high-caliber teams in the East, at least in theory compared to the Western Conference. As we know, the 2021 season has been abnormal, to say the absolute least. The condensed schedule paired with former episodes of COVID outbreaks have caused players to miss a ton of time with the league's health and safety protocol and injuries, and it just so happened that the defending champions' 2 best players caught the same injury bug during the same 1-month window. Of course, we acknowledge the Lakers to be far superior to any 7 seed in NBA history, but the 7 is where LeBron and AD were forced to operate from after returning from their injuries. In a normal season, having 2 superstars miss the same month of action is incredibly unlikely as is, so I would project the Lakers to be an extreme outlier among potentially disadvantaged 7 seeds. Again, we're in a 72-game schedule too, so that month with no LeBron and Anthony Davis is even more damaging than it would usually be. So there's still a slight chance of losing the Lakers to the play-in tournament, which would be an absolute doomsday scenario for the NBA. Everyone wants to see LeBron and the Lakers in the playoffs. It's just not the same without LeBron. We saw that in 2019. But that specific doomsday scenario seems pretty ridiculously impossible at this point, assuming LeBron and Anthony Davis are healthy. Again, I'm recording this Sunday, so let's hope that hasn't aged poorly by the time I get this edited and uploaded. Ultimately though, we know the NBA wants to put out the best product possible for its fans to enjoy, so they'll definitely be paying very close attention to articles, social media, TV ratings, and anything else that reflects positively or negatively on the play-in tournament. Evan Wash, executive vice president of the NBA's analytics team, noted that league-wide viewership is up 25% during the final month of the season. He also states the front office suspects a big part of this viewership bump is due to the increased nightly drama and storylines created by the play-in tournament. At the time of this recording, I'm about to watch the Grizzlies-Warriors matchup for Game 72. This game decides who will be the 8th and 9th seeds for the play-in. I'm just assuming Steph is going to go for 50 or something stupid. And the exact same game is being played right now, actually, in the East between Washington and Charlotte. If Washington wins that, we know they get the 8th seed. But the outcome of these games won't change the landscape of the league. There's not any huge turmoil on the line here. These games are more of a micro-drama in this grand scheme of things. But the increase in the number of these micro-dramas late in the season make it much more exciting to watch down the stretch, where it would usually be pretty dull and boring at this point in an 82-game season. So these have been my thoughts regarding the play-in tournament. Most fans seem to respond very positively to the idea pre-season, but those regards quickly turned negative as the season drove on with injuries and COVID, but have since begun to more mellow out again. This is all being recorded Sunday night before the ending of the final regular season games, so obviously this is without hindsight when I say this, but I'd be shocked if the play-in tournament was not here to stay long term. I think it provides more competition and drama during the usual dog days of the season, which is super important in the eyes of the league in terms of putting out an exciting product year-round. And thank you all so much for watching. Leave a like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, and I hope you're all excited for the play-in tournament.